Welcome back to Awakening Aphrodite with Amy Fournier. My guest today is Mario Martinez. Mario, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
All right. So everybody already heard your amazing biography and background, but is there anything that you would like to just say to point us out to really the crux of your work or how you describe yourself? You know, the elevator speech. If you meet someone in the elevator, how do you talk about what you do?
Certainly not about the weather, but mainly that what I'm doing with science is everyone pretty much agrees that mind and body communicate with each other. But what I'm bringing is the third component, which is communicating in a cultural context. So culture is extremely important in my work. That summarizes, and you'll see as we go along how important the culture is in wellness, relationships, longevity, anything that you can think of that has any meaning.
Okay, so before we get into that, tell us a little bit about your personal story, Mario. Like what, tell us just a little snippet. Like right now you're in the United States in Tennessee, correct? But you know, your life, how you grew up, where you grew up, and what got you into this line of work.
I'll keep it short because a lot of people like to talk about themselves too much, but I grew up in New York and Miami mostly, most of my life, Miami. And then I went to school in Spain, University of Madrid, came back, and then I went to Vanderbilt. That's why I'm in Nashville now. I did postdoctoral work there, and then I did in clinical psychology, and my specialty is neuropsychology, clinical neuropsychology, and what's called psychoneuroimmunology, how thoughts and emotions affect the immune, nervous, and endocrine system. So I went to school to study medicine in Madrid, and what was happening is that they were having a lot of riots there, and the medical school was the most radical. So they would close the school for 5-6 months. So I would take some psychology courses. I would come back, and this went on for a while. I said, that's it, I'm done. I'm going to leave medicine and go into psychology. So that's how fate and destiny work together in that sense. So then I came back to the States and did some more work at Vanderbilt and went into practice and got married, had kids, got divorced, all the usual things, the rituals that we do. And and then I became very, very interested in writing. And so I wrote 2 books. I had 2 bestsellers, as you know, and I'm working on I just finished the 3rd one, which is it gives me license to expand science because it's a novel. It's called The Phoenix Self, How People Can Live Up to 500 Years. So it's science and fiction. So the thinking is that I want to know more about how to create a life of wellness and a life of meaning, and really going back to Aristotle, who actually, and I'll tell you what studies have been done on Aristotle and the immune system as we go along, but the life of meaning, pleasure, and finding pleasure, meaning, and purpose are really important in your wellness. So that's basically it. I'm very curious, and I love good wine, as I was telling you. Albarino is one of my favorite. My father was from Spain. I love to cook and travel, work out, and have fun.
Well, one of the things I love about you and certain guests that I have, or I actually try to have all my guests, practice what you preach. I mean, you're just an amazing example of this whole psychology and mindset. And I am just so blown away. Well, first of all, I just want to share with everybody that I have pretty much all your books, although I don't have the Phoenix Self yet, maybe because that's the newest.
Yes, not out yet.
Okay, there you go. Oh, good. I'm off the hook. I feel better. But I have been studying you since I was in college because my graduate training in grad school, I studied sports psychology because I was always an athlete. But back in the Stone Age, they didn't have like mind body psychology and all that stuff. It wasn't an elective area to study. So the best I could do was study sports psychology because it was the closest thing to the mind-body connection. So my whole life, I have been fascinated and really interested in this mind-body relationship. It always would just kind of stupefy me why, I mean, let's just take like a baseball game, right? And you know, you've got an amazing hitter who gets up to bat and in practice, he's killing it. He's hitting it out of the park, all that stuff. You know, end of the 9th inning, bases loaded. comes up to him at plate and he strikes out. So there you go. There's the mind affecting the body, right? And to your point, thank goodness that it's becoming more accepted that the mind affects the body. But I would love for you to get into the background of how this got all disconnected. How did we mainly grow to think like the mind, like psychologists are separate than a heart doctor or whatever? Can you just talk a little bit about the history of the separation and thank goodness how it's starting to change?
Yeah, well, mostly started with Descartes. Descartes was the one who talked about mind. And what happened with Descartes is that in those days, the church ruled. The priests were also doctors, and so they ruled.
It was like
And in order,
1700s, right? Wasn't it?
yes,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, I think it was a 16th, 17th century.
Okay.
But so Descartes, in order to be able to write and to be able to expand, he was a great philosopher. Divided he said the mind is the domain of the church, the body is a domain of science. So he divided that, the Cartesian split, they call it. And from then on, then medicine became very knowledgeable with the body, and then theologians became very knowledgeable with the mind, but it was a split. Then we went on with especially psychology and psychiatry. Psychiatry was called the bastard child of medicine, and they called it the talk cure from Freud and all that. So in order to justify itself as a science, it became super biological, and it moved away from mind, and now everything is pharmacological intervention. Psychology also, in order to get some sense of validity and operational science, became very behaviorist with Skinner and what he called the black box, where it goes in and out. There's nothing here. It's just stimulus response. My mentor at Vanderbilt, my thesis professor, debunked one of the people that debunked Skinner, and they wouldn't publish his work. It's like the Inquisition. So finally, he said to one of the editors, "I'm going to give you a test. If you fail it, will you publish my work?" And they did. Here's what he did. Very simple study. Science has to be simple. You would think, well, stimulus response doesn't matter. Just goes in, goes out, the black box. That's what you are. So he gave a little test that he had people do a look at it was like a little pond, something like it. And he had a log with a bird on top of the log, and then he had a frog and all the things that are put in, right? So then he gave them a test. He said, let's forget now and see what you remember later. And the test was, where was the bird? Well, the bird was on top of the log. And who swam under the bird, under the log? The fish, and there was no fish. They created, because fish is associated. So what you're doing is you have something in here that affects your response to the stimulus. So there's no way to debunk that. There's no way to and much more. And Chomsky did a lot of work too, showing that language is not just a stimulus response. So basically, it lost a lot of power. But now, unfortunately, psychiatrists become super biological. And the psychiatrist will spend an average of 8 minutes seeing you. You have a nurse practitioner who sees you, and then he comes in, how's your appetite, how's your libido? Okay, we're going to do this, and that's about it, unfortunately. So they know very little psychotherapy in general. So that's what's happened. So now psychoneuroimmunology has come in. My mentor, George Solomon, was the one who created psychoneuroimmunology. And it basically started looking at how psychological processes like mind and body, cognition and emotions, how do they affect the nervous, immune, and endocrine system? And it does affect it. The problem is that nobody can tell you, except me, how is it that the mind and the body talk to each other? That's what the first book, The Mind-Body Code. I mean, okay, mind and body communicate. How do they communicate? Well, they communicate. They don't go any further than that. The way that they communicate, you have to go back to anthropology. And I bring a lot of anthropology, as you know, in my work. 150 years ago, when we became Homo sapiens, there was no language. We went by the smell the pheromones of the smell. And if you saw a lion, you would have to go, or something like that. There's no language. So you would have the stress hormones and everything. Language comes on and consciousness comes on. And consciousness comes on about maybe 40,000 years ago, when we started burying our dead and we started using trinkets that had no function as tools. You have to have a lot of cognition to be able to do that. So then language comes in, and the senses are replaced with language. Instead of smelling a lion or grunting, you say, there's a lion there. The brain had to adjust to that, and it had to create biosymbols. It adjusted to linguistics, and the immune system had to adjust to the cultural brain. That's why when you say to somebody, you're so stupid, and you shame them, they have interleukin-2 and other molecules of inflammation, as if there's some kind of pathogen out there. So we're a bioinformational field where language is a signal for the biology. That's how it works. So
language instructs our biology.
Yeah, but language biology and emotions biology. How is it possible that if you say to somebody, you're such a wonderful person, and you smile, you get oxytocin? If you say you're such an idiot, you get molecules of inflammation, because the brain is cultural and it's psycholinguistic in the way it responds to a stimulus out there. It's a higher consciousness.
But where does the person's kind of belief in the importance of what the person said, like someone could just say, you're an idiot, and it doesn't affect you because you don't even know that person, as opposed to someone that you care about and you care what they think, and that does affect you. So how is that different?
Well, internally it has to do with self-esteem. If you have good self-esteem, someone says you're an idiot, what I would say is, tell me how I'm being an idiot. I make them own up. If you don't have good self-esteem, you question yourself. Externally, when there are people that you give value to, like cultural editors, and they do something and they say something to you, then it has a major effect on you. So it's, again, you see, it's a contextual thing. Self-esteem is extremely important. Self-valuation is extremely important, because that's how you process information. And that's how centenarians have great self-esteem. They're what my mentor, George Solomon, called healthy narcissist. So you have to have valuation. You don't have to brag about it, but if somebody says, you're so beautiful, well, thank you. Oh, it's just my mother, or genes, or I just put some makeup. What that does, it kills the opportunity for gratitude, which increases oxytocin, serotonin, endorphin, all the good psychoneurological things that enhance immune function. If you say, oh, it's just in my genes, you get nothing.
Or you should have seen me yesterday.
Yeah, you should have seen me yesterday, where you get a little bit of stress hormone. I love your hair. I haven't washed it in 3 days. That's because the cultures teach you to devalue individual. I'll tell you something. I went to dinner the other night to my favorite place, and I went by myself. So I had a great dinner, and this lady, older lady, comes over and she says, are you all right? And I said, yeah, what do you mean? She said, you're eating by yourself. I said, well, yeah, I'm celebrating. So what are you celebrating? Myself? She didn't get it. She was really concerned that there was something wrong with me.
She called the police.
With somebody.
She called the police.
Yeah, so that's how it's structured.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. You go to a restaurant, they say only one. Can we put you by the bar? No, don't put me by the bar. So it goes against the individualizing of the person, the individuating that Jung talked about. Collectivism is good for them. When you come out of the tribe and you go beyond the pale, you get the archetypal wounds.
And two things, more so as you get older, and if you're female, because if you're single, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, of course. Of course. And because it's an age consciousness too. I never tell anybody my age. It's none of my business. And when I went to the longevity center that I work with, they do epigenetic and genetic testing and all that. And they said, well, let's see how you do it, because you talk so much about longevity. Well, I was 21 years younger than my chronological age.
I love it.
So when people ask me, how old are you? I'll say I'm 21 years younger than my chronological age. And what's your chronological? 21 years older. The reason you don't do it is because you're pegged into the culture. If you're 20, you're treated this way. If you're 40, you're treated this way. Just like doctors, they have to have a label, a diagnosis to reduce their own anxiety. So if they say, if this is stress or what do you want for your age, they don't know what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So you see, we have a lot of admonishments constantly from the culture that hit you and you don't know it's hitting you. And my job is to let you know how you're being hit and what you can do about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, gosh, there's so much there, Mario. Wow. Yeah. Well then let's just back up a second and just if you could explain and share with people, you actually coined the term biocognition. So I know you've been talking about it, but can you just kind of define that for people so they can and getting into how the culture enforces our beliefs, which then determine our behaviors, which then determines the outcome. And let's just get right into the meat of that.
Yeah, well, before it was biology and cognition, but
Uh-huh.
since we're inseparable, biocognition is mind and body within a cultural context. That's the
Okay.
definition. Mind and body within a cultural context is biocognition, biocognitive
Mm-hmm.
science. And
Mm-hmm.
and you cannot extract the cultural components of it. And I'll give you some examples later when we talk about it, but you can't extract it. We are culture. And what is culture? Culture, anthropologists have been arguing about this for a long time, but culture basically is anything that's important for survival and meaning, which means aesthetics, ethics, sexuality, longevity, that a group agrees to believe. That's the culture. And it's very, very difficult to get rid of. Spain was conquered by the Arabs for 800 years. They
Mm-hmm.
kept the language, they kept the religion, they kept their wines, things that very difficult to get rid of. So there's a lot of good things about culture. The problem is that when you want to individuate, the culture doesn't like it because you're no longer serving the collectivism. And you have to individuate in order to become whoever it is that you want to become.
And why would the culture subconsciously or not obviously um, discourage or punish individuation? Like why? Just like
It doesn't serve the collectivism. The thinking is that at first you're a child and we're very inept when we're born. Animals know what to do. They walk. We need 12, 18 years for somebody to take care of us.
mm-hmm.
So the collectivism is extremely important and it's set up for that. But then anything that loses its value becomes a burden. It loses its value when you want to individuate, but the culture continues to do that in order to maintain the collectivism of how do we keep this? How do we maintain this without realizing that you have to individuate? Some people do, and some people don't. The ones that don't are what I call the historians. You go back 30 years to your neighborhood, and they're still there, and they look like hell because
Wow.
historians don't do really well, but they can
mm-hmm.
tell you everything that's been going on. So
mm-hmm.
that's one of it. The other is that once you individuate, you begin to question the rules that you were taught by the culture editors. Girls can be just as good as boys with math. Being a tall girl is not a problem. Men can cry. Those kind of things. That goes against the. I mean, think of what they say when they say it was beyond the pale. The connotation is negative. For me, beyond the pale is great because you're getting beyond the pale. So there's the admonitions that they have, and then they put you through the culture portals. They say, okay, you're an infant, now you're a child, now you're an adolescent, a young adult, middle age is extremely dangerous, then you're a senior citizen, and then you die. That's it. That's
mm-hmm.
living the life of the unaware, the mindlessness.
And the associated different levels of perceived value of each of those stages.
Yes, and even the perception of time. Time goes fast here, goes slow there. But if you try to individuate, and let's say you're middle-aged, and let's say middle age is 45 or whatever it is.
mm-hmm.
I don't believe in middle age because centenarians say it's dumb. You find out when you die. There's no such thing. But let's say 45. A day before 45, you're not middle-aged. When you reach 45, you're middle-aged. There, you have to start dressing middle-aged, looking middle-aged, and getting sick like the middle-aged.
Be appropriate.
Being appropriate. And then if you say, you know, I just decided I'm going to give up this job I have, and I'm going to do this job, and I'm going to go back to school. No, you can't do that. You have to start saving for your retirement. So you can go to a nursing home when you can't take care of yourself anymore. What the hell is that? Who wants to live that way? That gives you a message to the immune system, a sense of helplessness, and that the bottom half is just on helplessness. What does gerontology study? The deterioration of aging, of growing older. What do I study? The causes of health in the process of growing older.
Huge difference in all of medicine, I'd say. They're studying the pathology because they also have a bias because who they're seeing are the sick people. The healthy people aren't going there. And I know you mentioned that in your work with the sanitarians, which just means people over 100, that for the audience, that they don't go to the doctor. Let's get into that. You're a longevity expert. Okay. So share with us a synopsis of, for 20 years, you've been studying this and you've identified different qualities that enable them to be living such a high quality life. Because it's one thing to live a long time. It's another thing to not want to, so they have a good quality of life. They're enjoying their life. And also share with us what you call the myths of aging, and or which are basically the lies of aging. They're not true. The cultural beliefs that are definitely not true.
Yes. Well, first you have to go back to the system like we did with anthropology. Here, we're going to go back to the system of biology. Again, biology, in order to legitimize itself, it had to borrow principles from physics. And there's a lot of physics in our body. We have a heart that pumps, but it also communicates with the thymus and all kinds of things. So in order to become a model using physics, one of the concepts of physics that works really well for airplanes and planets and everything else is that a system it goes from order to disorder. That's the entropy. They call entropy. Order to disorder. That's not how we function. We're self-organizing, self-creating systems. So complexity is a better entropy. Complexity says we go from simple to complex. And the brain of a 50-year-old is a lot more complex than the brain of a 5-year-old. So knowing that, then you look for how complex are you becoming or how feeble are you becoming? And then gerontology is studying what are the illnesses of aging. There are no illnesses of aging. There's no such thing. Well, they say, well, you deteriorate, your brain deteriorates, you have the dementia. It depends on your genetic expression and what you do with your time. If you are 20 and you do cocaine for 20 years, at 40, you're going to be in really bad shape with somebody who doesn't do cocaine. And now epigenetically, we know how to trigger and cap gene expression of illness and the causes of health. That's what we're doing in Poland.
Okay, so please explain to people what epigenetics is. And you talk about how biology is not as powerful as culture in affecting the way we age, live, feel, look, all that stuff. Please explain epigenetics.
Okay, first, everything is empirical, as you know, that I talk about. I'm not just dreaming it. Centenarians, when I first started studying, I thought, well, it's got to be genes. They have long telomeres and all that kind of stuff, the conventional, which is myth. They don't. 20% genetics, that's it. 20%. Even long telomeres, short. They have long telomeres, short telomeres. Telomeres are the caps that you have at the end of the chromosomes, and it was thought that the longer, the longer you live, because of more of the reproduction of cells. But now we know that telomerase is an enzyme that actually creates telomeres and nourishes them. One of the ways to get telomerase is self-love. What's up? So what is epigenetics? That's another thing that people talk about, and they really don't go deep into it unless you're an epigeneticist. But basically, the thinking is genetics. You're inheriting your genes. You have your DNA and the nucleus, and then the genes are passed on by your father, your mother. Your mother will give you the mitochondria for the cells, all of that, and that's it. That's it. The environment doesn't have anything to do with it. It's just genetics, and unfortunately, most of medicine still functions that way. Genetics. It's in your family. What do you want? You got diabetes type 2. It's going to happen. Epigenetics looks at how the environment, external and internal, can change in gene expression, either by capping it with methylating, it's called methylating, or with histone capping, based on what the environment is showing you and the environment inside you, what is showing you. So what we do in the place in Poland, for example, is, let's say you take your genetics and epigenetics, and they find that you have a propensity for diabetes. That's a propensity, not a genetic sentence. And then they teach you ways to cap that potential expression for diabetes. No medication, just methods using some of my techniques. Also, sometimes they'll use supplements. For example, if you have a propensity for selenium to not be absorbed very well in your body, all you have to do is you take, and of course you measure it to see if it's true, because it's only a propensity. You take 1 Brazil nut a day, and that's more than you need for selenium. That's it. So epigenetics is basically saying, not only do we inherit our genes, but we inherit a potential to be expressed or not be expressed. And there are some exceptions. There are about 2 or 3% of that. You're born with a genetic mistake. If you have a particular problem with some genes, you might have Down syndrome, or you might have illnesses that MD and things like that, that come from faulty genes. The person's not faulty, the genes are faulty. But other than that, it's acquired. And we're sold the concept that you always have to, you have to be on medication and you have to be on this. Some people do.
Or it's destiny.
Most people are over medicated. And getting back to your questions as centenarians, I asked one, when was the last time you went to the doctor? And I'm not suggesting this. I'm giving you an anthropological report here. He said, 70 years ago when I broke my leg. Oh, and the doctor took real good care of it. It's really good. And you haven't been back? No. Why should I go back? So I said, what does your doctor have to say? Said, they're all dead. I don't know.
Exactly.
So now I don't suggest that you don't go to the doctor, but I suggest that you be very careful, because it's your body. Your doctor knows more physiology than you do. You know more phenomenology than he does or she does of your body. So centenarians, they say you got to take this and this. What is the side effect? Well, you could have a heart attack. Nope, no, I don't want it. You got to take it because it's a risk benefit factor. No, I'm not going to take it. And if anything happens to me, I won't sue you. They take responsibility for their action.
Yeah. Well, the crux of your work is that the culture influences our beliefs, which then determines our actions and our behaviors and the way we live our life and the way we think. And we don't know it. Like, we're not aware of that this is even happening. I mean, just because you give the example of, the perception that diseases and illnesses run in families based on genetics, it's been so pervasive. But if you just go down the street or you go to a restaurant, you see a family eating together, and let's just say, oh, wow, what do you know? They're all, a little bit overweight and they all kind of look the same. And so and you think, oh, wow, okay, so it's true. Look, dad's heavy, mom's heavy, daughter's heavy, baby's, little chubby.
So it runs in the family.
And so you think, oh, see, genetics, it runs in the family.
Yeah.
And what people don't consider is behaviors and expectations run in the family. And what I love about your work is the power of a self-fulfilling prophecy and the power of what you believe is true. Because I know, like you, everyone's always asking me my age. And I do often tell them, though, because I feel like, first of all, people need to see it's possible. We need to get this in our collective unconscious of this is possible to age well. And I think you actually have said you can age better. Centenarians actually are healthier as they get older. What a mind-blowing concept. It's completely contrary to what everyone thinks now.
If you're 90 and healthy, you had more practice at keeping your causes of health. But I'll give you some idea, some examples of culture, how it really affects.
Please.
Okay. Many studies, thousands of studies, but I'll just give you some things that are really more pertinent here. major studies were done years ago looking at the effect on how people perceive lucky numbers or unlucky numbers. And they looked at Asian Americans, thousands of Asian Americans. And in Japanese and Chinese and other languages, the number 4 is associated with death.
Mm.
So that's how it's perceived. They looked at death certificates and they found a significant statistical correlation between the 4th of each month and death.
Wow.
They looked at Americans and they thought, okay, let's see, what if the Friday 13th, and they couldn't find correlation because Friday 13th is an unlucky number, but it doesn't mean you're going to die. Mm-hmm. Examples of that. As I mentioned earlier, because you've been to my webinars and all that, but you think about menopause. It's hormonal and it's got a change of life. In some countries, like in Uruguay and other places, they call it bochorno, which means shame. And shame causes inflammation. So when they have the hot flashes, they have all kinds of problems: inflammation, low self-esteem, low libido.
Well, in America, it's called the curse in a lot of
the curse. That's right.
Families.
So
the curse,
all of that is
like hello.
it's very it's very shaming. In Japan, they call it konenki, which means the second spring, the second chance. None of those symptoms. In fact, their libido goes up, their self-esteem goes up, the worthiness goes up, and they become teachers for other women. So that's another example of culture. So, and I can go on and on and on, but we can move on to whatever you want. Culture is extremely powerful.
Well, I think just to wrap that up, people just have to consider, what they expect is going to happen as they get older. What is considered to be quote unquote normal. And what I always say is there's a difference between something being normal and something being typical, unfortunately, because people getting more fatigue, gaining weight, losing strength, losing vitality, their eyesight going down the tubes, losing their memory and their balance, and all these things might be typical because we're seeing them around us, but it doesn't mean it's normal. And what's absolutely critical is for people to really seriously question their beliefs and really pay attention to the words they use and the things that they say about themselves and their life and what they expect is going to happen. Because I started a long time ago telling myself things like, my life gets better as I get older. I get healthier as I get older. Because I get more wise and I get less caring about what everyone else thinks. And I get more, more agency over myself and more self-aware. So all these little practices and thoughts, people just have to be conscious of. It, happens all the time. Someone forgets something walking into a room. Now, if they're older, they might say, whoops, having a senior moment. Oh my God, I'm losing my mind. I might get dementia. Whereas if it was someone who's 15 years old and forgets something walking in the room, they'll just say, oh, I forgot something. So
because
people have to really think about and be conscious of it.
There's a method of looking at that. That's you're right. It's the attribution. The attribute, without knowing it, you give it an attribution based on the portal that you're in. So if you forget something, the attribution, because you're 80, is that it's dementia. If you're 20, the attribution is I just forgot. Yes. But what do you do neuropsychologically? What do you do when that happens and you're 80? You go to the kitchen and you forgot why you went to the kitchen from the bedroom. Go back to the bedroom where you registered the memory and you'll get it. And you realize that it's just you're not paying attention to things. There's a little deterioration that goes on, but it's minimal when you get away from the attributions of the portal. And then that the senior moment, you never, as you said, you never say senior moment, because what the attribution says, if this is happening because of this, I'm helpless about it. If this is happening because I'm giving it the wrong attribution, I'm empowered about it and I can do something.
Absolutely. It's just so critical. And, when you hear people even say things like, it's tough getting older, and it's people just have to be very conscious of the words they use because your body's always listening and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And remember the language that I talked about, the language now is bioinformational. So whatever you say, it's like, for example, you're driving and somebody gets in front of you and they almost hit you, immediately you're going to have, especially norepinephrine and epinephrine, and then later you have some cortisol, which takes a little longer. But then instead of letting it go and taking it as a signal to slow down and listen to the music, not only do you ruminate it, but you can't wait to get to work to tell people.
To relive it.
Yeah, the biology doesn't know that it's over. Your cognition knows, but your biology continues to secrete whatever it is that you're talking about, because you're talking about it and you're creating a little theater. Although your cognition knows that it didn't happen, biology doesn't. So what happens at the end of the day when you do that? And of course, somebody else will out-victimize you. Oh, you're not going to believe this. 2 cars got in front of me yesterday. It's to out-victimize each other. So you're creating a toxicity at work, a toxicity at home. When somebody gets in front of me, I'll curse them in a couple of languages. I take a deep breath and let it go. And I say, okay, I got to pay attention to my music and this. But there's always a temptation, especially when there's a vacuum, a social vacuum. You talk about the weather or something bad that happened. I forced myself not to mention it to anybody. Nothing. How was your day today? Great. How was your driving? Fine. That's it. If not, you're rerunning toxicity. And do that for 50 years and see what it'll do to you.
I love that. Our words are so powerful. It's like my episode 69 with Laurel Arica, and we talk about the magic power of words and how you're basically casting spells by the power of what you speak.
Yeah.
And you're calling it into being. And like what you're saying is you just keep reliving it biologically, which, just never helps to detoxify and purge those emotions. And you talk about there's a difference between being a victim and being victimized. I think this is important. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Yes. You're a victim. If somebody rapes you, you're a victim. And you have been victimized. But if you use that as a way to manipulate to get out of things, as a way to get pity, then you are victimizing yourself. You're victimizing. You live in victimhood and you speak it fluently. Like Carolyn May says that you speak woundology. So, and that's what it is. So once you've been victimized, you re-empower yourself with whatever you need to do, and you never use that as a way of manipulating or getting what you want. Otherwise, your body will give you a passport to maintaining victimhood. And your body will adjust, because the body has an ethical process that says, okay, if you're a victim, you have a headache today, and the culture will set it up so victims get a lot. We have a system where victims get or victimized get a lot. And I'll call you and say, do you want to go to the mall? No, I'm just gonna relax and do a little meditation, take a hot bath. I'll do it some other time. Come on. But if you say, I have a migraine, oh, okay, what can I do for you?
You get a pass.
A pass to victimhood.
It's acceptable.
Very important. If I have a headache and people say, how do you feel? I look at the part of me that doesn't hurt and I say, I feel good, so I don't lie. I think of my toes, they don't hurt. I'm feeling pretty good about my toes. If I talk about the migraine, we're going into victimhood language, and my body will say, well, if this is what's going on with you, this is what's happening, and we're going to keep it. And you get power, the power of the victim.
Yeah. So that learned helplessness.
Yeah, learn helplessness. And learn empowerment means that you have to access resources to overcome a challenge. That's what empowerment is.
And then you've also talked about how not only with the victimhood, but there's reasons that people can subconsciously keep an illness.
Yes.
Or get a disease. So can you share with us a little bit about that?
And I'll talk about it because I don't want to be irresponsible and say that people create their illnesses, because my background is in biology, and I want to be, but at the same time, what it means, not that you don't create an illness. What you do is you facilitate the gene expression of an illness by how you think. So for example, there are 2 things that need to happen for a person to heal. You can cure somebody and not necessarily heal them. What I found in many, many years of hospital work and private practice and all kinds of things is that you have to look at 2 things. You have the illness. You don't tell the person you created it or anything, because they didn't. But you have to know, what is this illness allowing me to get away from that I don't want to do? Secondary gains, extremely important. If you don't work that out, you're not going to get rid of the illness. And the other one that nobody talks about is, what is it getting me out to do that I don't feel worthy of doing?
Yes.
That's another one. Those two, if you don't work those two out, very difficult to heal. You could be cured, but it comes right back. And that's where the illness becomes. And you would ask, well, why would someone get sick to not be able to do something that they love? Because of self-esteem. People who win the lottery lose it on the average for in 18 months. And joy can be a very dangerous emotion. If you
dangerous.
yes, because joy is like it's like the fuel, and if your self-esteem is low, it won't go in. If it becomes a threat. People sometimes end relationships because they're too good.
Or well, back to our self-sabotaging behavior, right?
Yeah, that's right. This is too good. How do I handle this? So yep. Known misery is less stressful than unknown joy.
Yes, the known, yep, the known misery is less stressful than the unknown joy. It's so true. So once again, we come back to a feeling of unworthiness for why we can sabotage ourselves, because a lot of people fear failure, of course, so they don't start things because they don't want to fail, because they have low self-esteem. And then we also fear success, and we put a cap on like how good our life can be, because why? Because we don't feel worthy. I mean, how do we fix that?
Well, I'll tell you another little study.
I know I've done that. That's for sure.
No, I mean, we all do. The psychologist, I think Snowden, he's a British psychologist. He looked at people that consider themselves to be lucky and unlucky. And he divided it into two groups. Looked at them 10 years later. The lucky people were healthier, better relationships, better jobs, more money. The unlucky, the opposite. Why? The attribution. He found that the lucky people will say, if something good happens, I'm lucky, that's me. If something bad happens, that's not going to last because I'm lucky. Look at the opposite. Something bad happens, well, that's it, that's me. Something good happens, it's not going to last.
Those oh my God, so alone, true. That's so
those
true.
Two things alone will deal with your longevity and your wellness.
Oh my God, I'm not going to mention names, but I have people very close to me that is their mindset, is like they're always kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop and quote unquote looking at the other side, like being devil's advocate, so to speak, and just kind of always flipping it around, like as a way of self-protection. I know, like, but still it's like we have to be conscious to let the good in. And I think, I can share too. I don't have children. I have a little puppy. Well, she's 13. Oh, but we don't talk about age. She's
you told her age because now she's pegged.
Well, I always call her puppy on purpose, and she is like, everyone thinks she's a puppy too. So there you go. But I can't even tell you how deeply I love this animal. I always say she's like my heart with fur on it. I just put all of my maternal everything, and she's just, I could go on and on. But what I'm getting at is, unfortunately, and maybe you could tell me what the professional term for this is, because I know there is one. Sometimes and I know parents feel like this with their children. The love is so overwhelming in my heart. I feel like my heart's going to burst. And that's kind of when you cry and stuff, because you tears of happiness. But then I go right to, oh my God, but she's going to die. And probably, within the next 10 years, let's just say that's pretty practical, I mean, and oh my God, how am I going to function? So I immediately check it, that love and that joy and that what you call an exalted emotion gets checked and sabotaged in myself from fully feeling it, because my brain goes to the, oh crap, but what about when she's gone, so help me with that.
Well, yeah, that's an attachment issue that it's very, very important. That love then after a while becomes need. So you have to spread out your love. It's very important, because if you don't, then whether it's one person or whatever, you might want to ask yourself, and I'm saying it for the audience, because we all do this, and you're doing it with a dog, but okay, what is it that this person provides, or this thing or this animal provides for me? And you're going to find that it's either or three: belongingness, a sense of joy and companionship. All right, those things are really important, but we disown that and we put it on the other person or the dog or whatever. We think that they're giving us that rather than we owning it ourselves. So one of the things you can do is when you're alone,
Wow.
belongingness, what is the terrain for belongingness? You know that we don't change behavior, we change terrains. The terrain for belongingness is permission to be where you are. So let's say you go take yourself out to dinner and you're there by yourself. Belongingness is not being with a dog or somebody else. I give myself permission to be here and embody that. That's belongingness. Joy, you're not with your dog or not with your partner or whatever. How do I create self-significance in what I'm doing? That creates joy. And companionship, if I'm not with that person or that animal or whatever, what kind of relationship do I have with myself when I'm alone? And how do I enhance that? And then the love will become something that's one thing the centenarians do. They know how to mourn without dying with their dead. And they know how not to get sick with unrequited love. So it's very
I
important.
love that. You know, I've never heard it all explained that way. That is tremendous. Wow. And you know, and just on the sanitarian thing, you shared that another thing they do is they're very attached to their joy. Not only do they control how they speak and what they think, but they most importantly, you know, because I'm all about healthy lifestyle, mind, body, spirit, all important. And I talk about how our thoughts and our beliefs are like ingredients that we have to pay attention to, just as if eating a carrot or an organic chicken leg or whatever. These
Yeah.
are all very important ingredients to the holistic part of who we are. But how you point out how the sanitarians in your research, they don't really obsess too much about make sure you're eating healthy and don't smoke and all that. And you actually give examples of, to them, the important thing is their self-agency, their connection to their joy, and they have rituals. And
Yes.
that some of them even smoke one cigar at night before they go to bed.
Well, you've
So,
done some really good research with my work. I'm
oh,
impressed.
heck yes. Oh, you have no idea. So please, can you just really expand on that? Because
Yes.
this is really critical. I mean, everybody's thinking, well, you got to exercise, you got to stay attached to your joy, and you have to have rituals. So explain, please, the difference between rituals and routines and how we can learn from the sanitarians.
Yes. What I found is that causes of health. One of the causes of health is rituals. And examples that you know already, because I talked about it in the book, but this woman in Cuba, she was 101 or 102. I didn't ask, what are your rituals? Because that biases. I did more an anthropological ethnography. I said, what are the things that you do that have meaning for you to end the day or to start the day, that you find joy as a way of saying, what is my joy and what is my culture? Oh,
I like that.
I have a shot of rum before I go to sleep. Number one, ritual. Number two, flexibility and boundaries. How many do you have? One. Why don't you have more? That's all I want. They don't abuse rituals. They abuse routines. You don't abuse love. You abuse need. So that's very important. If you are a vegan centenarian, and they're not too many, but there's some, very few, and you're invited to a barbecue here in Nashville, they'll eat the barbecue. Inflexibility is worse than eating McDonald's and fries, because inflexibility creates a sense of an urgency of fear or something. So if you're living a life and not eating this and not eating that out of fear, forget it.
Love that.
So the important thing is that you do things. I don't eat a lot of meat. Every once in a while, once a month, I'll eat meat when I want to, not, oh, I'm going to eat meat because it's been a month. You can't do that. You got to live your life because your body was made to take everything with the Aristotelian mean. If you abuse tofu, it's going to be just as worse as if you use a cheeseburger. So that's the thing about centenarians. They have rituals. They have the Aristotelian mean when they know when to stop, and they have a tremendous amount of discipline, but not self-righteous or rigid discipline, but compassionate discipline for themselves.
Not in the sense of I forget the word you used. It began with a D, but not because they're punishing themselves. Or you say that culturally we have like a culture of glorified suffering. Like it's It's
Yeah, the
important.
misery, the known misery. That's
Yeah.
right. And I was in Peru a few years ago doing a lecture, a huge audience, and there was this woman who was very famous because she had cancer and she was a cancer survivor, and so she starts talking and people applaud and all that. And I said, I want you to, I'm going to do a little test here. I want you to talk to me for 5 minutes without the word cancer. She couldn't.
Nice.
She couldn't. I said, what's happening is your identity is the survival of cancer. So how many organs are you going to have taken out? You survived your lungs, just surviving. And a lot of people take those things as a badge, a cancer survivor. You don't want to be a survivor or anything. You want to be a thriving person. And you never say, my this, my that. It's not your illness. It's something that comes and go. Why? Because language has attribution.
So important. It is just so important. I'm so glad you said that. You actually also say that we create our identity, and basically from the relational opposites. So the duality in life, like I'm fat or I'm thin, I'm young,
Yeah.
I'm old, I'm a woman, I'm a man. So can you expand on how we create our identity? Let's just say I'm born a woman, and yes, I am overweight right now. So how do I create that? What can you
Okay.
explain what you mean by that?
Let's talk about obesity then, or food. It's
Mhm.
not hormonal, it's food monal. It's food. It's
Okay.
food monal. Okay, the first thing. The second
That's
thing
good.
is if you're trying to lose weight without looking at your hologram, it'll be yo-yo, up and down and up and down. You have to create a
And
hologram of who you are.
hologram is, can you define hologram?
A hologram is if you, let's say you're 20 pounds overweight. Well, you have to go back and look at the hologram. Were you born overweight? Most likely not. What did that overweight do to your thinner hologram? What was it? Was it protection? Was it an excess because you were lacking something else? And what would happen if you lose your weight? What would you be afraid of if you lose your weight? Oh, nothing, nothing. You got to teach people to think, because they don't, about those things. Oh, nothing. I want to lose my weight. What would you be afraid of if you lose your weight? What could you do that you can't do now, that you don't feel worthy of doing? So you see, you go
Back
back
to
to
that.
working with
Yep.
self-esteem before you do
Self-sabotage.
anything. So then you begin to visualize the hologram of how you want to look, but what are the things you do with the hologram, and the anxiety that you feel when somebody looks at you and they say, oh, you look really great. What is that going to do? People, when they lose weight, for example, they're overweight and they have to go sideways in a narrow place. After they lose their weight, they still go narrow because the hologram's still there. So you have to recall the hologram.
Or they walk by a window and see their reflection. They don't even identify themselves.
Right. Yeah.
Because they're kind of stuck in
the brain requires a time to recall the hologram.
Uh-huh.
And look
So
at, for example,
self-concept is
but it's actually a hologram, because when you have the phantom limb, you lose your arm. It still hurts and it still itches. The hologram's still there, and there's some techniques to get it out. The body makes a hologram of time, space, and you lose your arm and it still hurts, although there's nothing there.
So how do we adjust and upgrade our hologram to what we want?
With a phantom limb, or just in general?
Just in general, like let's go back to the obese person or whatever.
By first identifying that it had a functional purpose that lost its function. Okay. Initially, gaining weight was either to protect yourself against some sexual abuse that you had, because or you were depressed and you ate so much to use that as a way of finding joy, or because you were told that in the family that everybody's fat. Whatever it is, it had a function. In order to adjust to the circumstances or to the tribe, you had to gain weight. There are people in rural areas that, and what does the language say? In Italy, the grandmother will say, eat everything, because love is food and food is love.
Yes.
So all those things. So learn where it came from and when did it become dysfunctional, and realize that it has nothing to do with food. Forget the food. It has to do with the terrain that feeds the food.
The mindset. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and the techniques, there are ways of doing it, as you know, from the book and other things that I do. But basically, that's the idea. You have to recall the hologram to what it was at some point, and understand that it had a function for you to do that. So for example, it had a function when you were, let's say a person was sexually abused as a child. The word no is very important at 3 and 4. But what happens that the word no doesn't mean anything. You are abused and you say no, and it still happens. So the word no means nothing. So you don't know how to set boundaries. The word no means nothing. All you have is your body, nothing else. Your body and no boundaries. What happens? You either become a prostitute, a drug addict, you gain weight, something happens in order for you to compensate for that. So you have to go back always developmentally. How did this happen? And see yourself as intelligent, that you had to be that way to survive. And then, okay, now I don't need this anymore. What am I doing? What am I rerunning that is no longer functional? And there's something I think in biology that, it's my theory, but I think it's really powerful, that when you're doing something for survival, there's an override and you don't get sick because survival overrides. But once you keep doing that, it no longer has a survival need, you get sick. Fibromyalgia, I've seen it. Is survival not to sleep well because you're protected, the grandfather comes in to touch or whatever. After a while, grandfather's not there and you still are hyper vigilant. It's not functional anymore. So you have sleep deprivation with delta, and then fibromyalgia comes in.
Okay, let's talk about the immunology of illness and how that's associated with beliefs and the correlation between inflammation. Well, let's get into the archetypal wounds. This is a real foundational piece of your work, I think. The three main ones, how they manifest, and more importantly, what you call the antidote to them, and how they can affect us biologically. So this is literally, folks, how the mind affects the body.
What I found in many cultures was that there are only 3 ways, fortunately, that a culture can hurt you. All the others are subsumed under that, and each has a different kind of psychoterminology. So the most primitive is abandonment. You can, if you're abandoned when you're a child, you die. You're left in the forest, you die. So that's the first. That feels cold when it happens because you're having constriction of your vascular system. And the feeling is aloneness. Everybody in the kindergarten class, the mommies are there and your mommy's not there. And you begin to feel a tremendous sense of aloneness, isolation, and your body constricts and it's cold. That's abandonment. Shame is a little higher. You can't shame a child till they can identify themselves in a mirror. And people will say, well, I can shame my child at 2. No, you scare them. You don't shame them. You have to have a cognition to be able to be shamed. You have to have a selfhood. And shame is hot. And the feeling in shame is that you want the earth to swallow you. You just don't want to be there.
You just want to disappear.
They disappear. And the reaction is, as we talked about, it's the inflammation, the tumor necrosis factor, the interleukin 2 and others, that comes out and it's hot.
Which presents as virtually any disease or fibromyalgia or autoimmune diseases, mostly, thyroid problems.
Yeah,
that's
I'll give you a correlation with each, not a cause, but a correlation. And the third, which is the hardest, is betrayal.
Okay.
Betrayal.
So abandonment, shame, and betrayal, the 3 big
abandonment,
ones.
Shame, and betrayal. Abandonment is cold, shame is hot, and betrayal is hot. Because the emotion is anger. You have been tricked. You have been used. True. And if you do it to a child, you'll see that they don't get embarrassed. You say, here's my iPhone. You can play with it. Do a little dance for me. And the child does a dance. Says, nope, I'm not going to give it to you. They don't get abandoned or shame. They get angry and they turn red.
Yeah.
So the emotion is red, but look how interesting this is. It's red and they're getting constriction. Constriction with anger is one, constriction with fear is the other. Constriction with fear is cold, constriction with anger is hot.
Okay, so what you're saying is that the vessels in the body will constrict, which means they close, they get smaller, they get tense, we get muscle tension. And then, but there's 2 types of constriction. One is.
Yeah, one constricts when you're angry, hot, but the other one constricts when you're cold. And so
which is abandonment.
Yeah, abandonment.
Okay.
Same hormones.
Wow.
But the mindset will tell it, okay, if this is hot, this is going to be how this is. The correlation with illnesses, and then I'll tell you the antidote, as you know, but the correlation with illness is not a cause correlation, is that when you have an abandonment wound, there's a tendency for underimmunity, hypoimmunity. And that what that triggers is potential infections, cancer, anything that has low immunity. Not a cause, a correlation. The shame, because of the constant inflammatory kind of baseline, systemic, related to autoimmune illnesses. Now there's a lot of indication that autoimmune illnesses can be actually triggered by a constant inflammation, because inflammation is necessary when you have a cut or a pathogen. But when it's systemic and the immune system doesn't know where to go, something happens and it begins to confuse itself. And one of the theories is that it creates autoimmune. I've seen over 300 cases of fibromyalgia, 90% shaming wound.
So many people carry shame. I had one of my episodes, I think it was 74, on trauma and unresolved trauma. I mean, if you're born in the Judeo-Christian culture, you're born with shame because of, the story of Adam and Eve. Like, we're shamed. If you're a woman, you're shamed because, we talked about the curse, right? So there's just like an inherent shame, I think, in all of us. And God forbid, if you were the victim or something happened to you or any kind of abuse, there's tremendous shame there. So, and I know shame is a barrier to overcoming addictions, right? And just getting back to the self-worth and all that, like, and people who love themselves and take care of themselves. So many people don't take care of themselves because they really just don't consider themselves to be valuable enough to be deserving the care.
Right.
And that's a shame issue, right?
Yeah. All three of them can cause out. All three of them can really affect your self-esteem. But the antidotes, because I know we're running late here, the antidote for abandonment is commitment, but commitment to self. For shame, honor to self, and for betrayal, loyalty to self. One disempowers you, the other one empowers you, and it doesn't have to be related. You don't have to be honorable related to the shaming. Honor in general, honor consciousness, and in the book there's a explanation of that. But basically, you learn to live honor consciousness if you have an archetypal wound of shame, commitment consciousness if you have one on abandonment, and loyalty consciousness if you have one on betrayal. Okay.
Yeah, that's just such an important part of your work that we're going to refer everybody to the books and audiobooks, and even your webinars go into that too. It's just so fantastic. Before I let you go though, can we talk about your thoughts on the over masculinization of women common in culture today, and the difference between gender and gender identity that we're currently all kind of, they're up against, transgenderism, and how do you identify as a male or a female? Please share your thoughts on those things.
Okay, I'll give myself permission to be politically incorrect then, which means science with a backbone.
There you go. Thank you. Glad someone's got one.
Yeah, that's right. Well, first, I think that what's happened is 60 years ago, it was very rare for women to have cardiovascular problems. And the way that it was explained is, well, because the hormonal difference, and when they have children, all kinds of. Now women have as much cardiovascular problems as men because they have taken male characteristics to represent their female strength. They have masculinized themselves with a power suit. And if you're a CEO and you're a woman, you have to be a B and all that kind of thing, because you grow with the corporate ladder, the same with male consciousness rather than female strength. That's the first part. So you have to look for the goddess. You have to look for Aphrodite, for example. Her son was not very good. Her son was the god Phoba, the god of fear. But anyway, so that's one thing. Some men now are so feminized. I don't mean sexually, feminized in their consciousness.
Yes.
In some places like Denmark, they go and do their nails with their partners, and they do this with their partners, and everything has to be done with a partner. Now there's some incidences of male breast cancer.
Wow.
All right. So we were made biologically, not gender.
Are they called metrosexuals or something?
Metrosexual, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's basically they're manipulative. They do that to manipulate women to be liked. So it's not real. I mean, it's not genuine. But getting back to the sense, to the genders, we have two genders.
Yep.
Two genders. Women have XX chromosomes, XY men. Some women have XX, but it's a rare. The woman passes on the mitochondria to the child, which is the part of the cells that gives you energy. If you die now, 100 years from now, they'll be able to tell you we're a woman, and on and on and on. Only
so you're saying it's biological, it's physiologically
a biological
different.
thing.
Yeah, and not, how about the body parts? I mean, you're born with.
I have worked with people who had transsexual from male to female.
Okay.
We had to work with them for a year, dressed as woman, living as woman, to reduce the suicide rate to 10%, because it was very high. So because you say I am it or that, it doesn't change your biology. Even if you have a transsexual, the plumbing has been changed. You are still a woman, or you are still a man.
Because of the chromosomes? Is that what you're saying?
Well, the chromosomes, if you have you go from female to male, you're still going to have ovaries, and you have to have hormonal work to reduce the expression of the
testosterone,
ovarian, and all of that. But you can call yourself whatever you want. You want to be it, whatever, but it doesn't change your gender. There's gender. There are only two genders, and as many gender identities that people want. So when I do, sometimes I'll do TikTok, and people will say, "What's your pronoun?" I'm not interested in pronouns. I'm interested in character. I don't care about pronouns.
Nice.
That's what I tell them. And if they don't like it, they can leave. So now this is child abuse, I think. People that are ignorant of developmental psychology and ignorant of evolutionary biology are now in Minnesota. They have one of the schools putting kids through gender training. In 6 weeks, they have to identify what kind of pronoun they have.
Unbelievable.
Stupidity, because children need psychosexual development. And what happens, it used to be called gender identity disorder. Can't call it that anymore. Now it's adolescent dysphoria. It doesn't matter. What happens is some people, some kids, some adolescents, it's not unusual. They go through some issues of identity. 90% of it gets resolved itself. But sometimes a kid will say, a boy, "Mommy, look, I want to wear a dress." Okay, wear a dress. From now on, you're a girl. That's child abuse. They don't have the developmental psychosexual process to go through and work it out on their own. 90% work it out on their own. 10% need help. Not to change, but to adjust to what I'm a woman. Okay, we're going to adjust you to be a woman. 10%. So the people that are running these things are idiots and know nothing about biology or psychology. They're dangerous, these people.
And a lot of parents aren't speaking up because they
That's
fear
right.
the backlash and being quote unquote politically correct. So it just goes on and on and on. I mean, it's pretty common now.
Yeah, but it's also sexy to say, my son wants to be a girl and I'm helping him be a girl.
Yeah.
That's stupidity. You have to let them have a psychosexual processing. And then later, if they want to be female, they can be female, but they have to go through a process. You can't impose it with the, I think political correctness is intellectual fascism. So anyway, that's what I have to say.
Yeah.
Science with and I will argue with any scientist about that. Because it's really there. It's all there. And now
what's really there? What?
The gender. Some people are born and very early, I've seen them very early. They feel that this is not my body.
Yes.
Let's say little girl, this is not my body. That's fine. That's rare, but you have to pay attention to it. And you have to help them that if this is not my body, what kind of body do you want to have? That's fine. But that's rare. It's very rare.
But what about the people that are gay and they say, my whole life, ever since childhood, I didn't really identify with being a girl or a man or whatever. And I always, the parents will say, yeah, ever since they were young, they played with dolls, not trucks. And they just, what about those people that are saying, that's all how I always was, though?
Well, yeah, because they have a propensity. That's what I'm talking about. They have a propensity, and that's there. And nothing is biological. Nothing is environmental. It's a combination of the two.
But there's a difference between growing up that way and then the power of suggestion when a child is too young to even, is what you're saying.
That's right. Because in general, you have to look at the general, not the specific, the exclusions and then making everything out of the minority. You can't do that.
Yeah.
So this was a study that was done by feminists who felt that there was no such thing as culture. And there's nothing wrong with feminism, but there's something wrong with radical feminism. And we can talk about that some other day. But anyway, so they did a study and they had children, very young children, and they gave the boys dolls and they gave the girls little tanks. Within a couple of weeks, the boys were using the dolls to sword fight and the girls were putting the tanks to bed.
That's funny. Oh, wow. That's funny.
They didn't like the results.
Yeah.
So there's biology, but there's also choice. But you have to let them work it out in their own developmental process.
Let them work
before you put it on them. My best friend was gay, and I always knew he was something about him. And he married and went through hell. He had 2 kids, and he told me one day he got drunk and he said, "I got to tell you something. I'm gay and I'm gonna get a divorce and I'm gay." I said, "Hey, that's no big deal. I've always known this. What's your problem? You think I'm going to reject you now because you're gay?" But look at the suffering that person went through. Yeah. Because of the other side of forcing a person to be this or to be that. Now it's becoming the other way. Now if you say, "Hey, I'm straight and I like women," and I wait a minute, you're a beast. What's going on with you? That kind of punishment is cultural. But we're living a cultural based on social constructivism. That's what they're teaching in school. They don't teach you social constructivism. But they're saying social constructivism is basically biology. Don't worry about it. There's no biology. And then they do postmodernism, which is everything is relative. There's no moral compass. There's just so you want to be
there's no absolute truth. Really?
Absolute
You're
truth.
sure about that?
And I'll tell you something before we end. Aristotle, I mentioned that he said, okay, the hedonic life is not enough. The life of pleasure for pleasure is not enough. So we have to have something more, and he called it eudaimonia. And as you know that I talked about earlier.
I'm so glad you brought that.
And it's a Greek word, eudaimonia. Eu is good, daimonia is the spirit, not demon. So then he said we have to find pleasure and meaning, service, and meaning, service, and purpose. I have the pleasure. So lately, the last I mentioned, as you know, in the other webinar that you were in, the studies that have been done, several studies that look at something very, very specific in the immune system cells. It's called CTRA, Conserved Transcriptional Response to Adversity. It's a beautiful name. And those cells, about 21 to 40 cells, will respond to adversity with inflammation, antibodies, or antiviral. They divided people, okay, this is psychologically you're hedonic, psychologically you're eudaimonic, by the way that they describe themselves. The people who were eudaimonic, people who found service and all those things meaningful, had better CTRA, which means they have a better response to adversity. So there's biology, no question that there's biology. Whether gender or not, there's biology. You can't refute and say, well, everything's socially constructed or culturally constructed. You know, I'm a great believer in culture, but I don't take science out of the way there. So anyway, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes. So, all right. So just in closing thoughts, what is your advice to us to make sense of this all? And also, if we want to be an outlier, if we don't want to be the norm, like let's go back to aging quickly. If we don't want to just, get more decrepit as we age, but then we want to believe that, but then the culture is not reinforcing that. So everything we're seeing, advertisements, TV, everyone else talking, is to the contrary. So how do we maintain our agency?
First, you have to read my 2 books.
Yes.
That's what it's all about.
Okay.
But second, you have to deal with the archetypal wounds that are stopping you from individuating.
And we mentioned 3.
3. And then the most important, you have to have a subculture of wellness that supports your outlierness, your outlier consciousness, that you say, I want to live agelessly. Oh, wonderful. Or you look, this is a Hollister. The people in their under 20 wear them.
Your shirt.
And people say, oh, so you want to look like a teenager? No, I want a teenager to look like me. See, you need a subculture that supports, oh, what a beautiful shirt.
True.
I was talking to a CEO in Brazil, and he was wearing the same kind. And he said, I'm so glad that you're wearing that because people are making fun of me because I'm too old to wear a Hollister.
Wow.
So you have to find a subculture of wellness that supports your new way of looking at the world.
So
And you
back
will live
again
long.
to our environment.
Or environment. So you create
Mhm.
an environment that's supportive of wellness,
Yes.
not an environment
Okay.
supportive of restrictions.
Perfect. Dr. Martinez, anything you want to point people to, any projects, websites, your webinars, please mention your books. Where can people find more about you and learn more and get deeper into everything we've talked about today?
Yes, because I've written a lot to make it easy for people to, and of course, it'll make money. There's nothing wrong with making money, by the way. You don't want to say, oh, it's okay. It's wonderful to make money.
I'm glad you
The,
said that. There's
the
no
mind
shame
body
in
code,
wanting
no,
to make
no, of
money.
course, the mind
No
body
shame.
code and the mind body self, Amazon, anywhere. And then I'm doing, you can go to my YouTube channel. I have over 540,000 people that have been there, and I have about 300 free videos on all kinds of subjects.
And the name of the channel?
It's Dr. Mario Martinez.
Okay.
Real simple, Dr. Mario Martinez. Then my website, biocognitive.com. And then I'm doing a lot on TikTok now. I thought TikTok was just shaking your body and all, but there people are really, I did one on ending a relationship.
Wow.
And how to break away from the cycles of life. In 3 days, I've had over 15,000 people already.
Wow.
So it's actually, there's a hunger, there's a substance that people need.
Yeah.
So all those things, and TikTok, I'm the hashtag is house shrink.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. And you do webinars. I mean, there's
Yes.
just so much. If they go on, and look, this will be in the show notes, everybody, but there's just so many avenues is what he's getting at that you can find more
Sure.
about him.
Some
And
are
I know
free and some are not, but there's no
Yeah.
excuse. There's a lot of information there, and all based on good science.
Absolutely. A track record.
So I want to
Dr.
congratulate you for the work you do.
Oh, thank you.
And it's very nice. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. Well, I do have you to thank for a lot of my mindset for sure. And I obviously have more studying to do. But I'm just so grateful for your work in the world, and just keep going.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for joining us today, everybody. And make sure you check out those show notes for more details on how you can find out more about Dr. Mario Martinez.